You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and there's not a lot to get to today. There isn't going to be a lot to get to until we get live sports back. Alright, it's just that simple, but I'm going to keep breaking down whatever news there is to break down along with the Trifecta, and like I said, I do have some other things in the hopper, but there was an NFL signing yesterday that I want to talk about. It's not a major signing by any stretch, but the fact that this guy is still in the league is amazing to me. And that is Cam Erving. A guy who latched on with the Cowboys, probably for the veterans minimum. He's probably not going to play a lot. That Cowboys offensive line is set. Now look, they did need backup tackles. I get that. You look at their backups at offensive tackle, it's Mitch Hyatt, Brandon Knight, and Terrence Steele. I've never heard of any of those guys. Brandon Knight, I know him as a point guard. So if he's transitioning over to offensive tackle, that's not going to go very well. There are very few NBA players that could transition over to offensive tackle. Maybe Zion Williamson. And then that may be it. I understand that the Cowboys needed to add a backup tackle. And Erving's been around for a while. He has a first-round pedigree. I liked him coming out of FSU. But this guy has been complete garbage ever since entering the league. He's never had a Pro Football Focus grade better than 47.1. And that was in a year that he only played 276 snaps. I just don't understand why anyone would waste their time with this guy. This guy's been a major bust. This guy's been garbage every year. You want to tell me I'm making something out of nothing? You certainly can, but this guy just isn't a good player. There are so many better options out there. If the Cowboys wanted to add a backup offensive tackle, Field Yates of NFL.com put out the all-free agency team for offense, and let me tell you, that team would have been pretty good. And if you look at the offensive tackles that are available in free agency, besides Cam Erving, you've got Kelvin Beachum, Jason Peters, DeMar Dotson, Greg Robinson, Donald Penn, Marshall Newhouse. You've got talented players there. Why are the Cowboys wasting their time with this guy? I understand it doesn't mean a lot in the grand scheme of things. Okay? I get that. But there were so many better options available. And if either Tyron Smith or La'el Collins goes down with an injury, and Cam Erving is pressed into starting duty, I feel sorry for Dak Prescott. He's going to have a long season. Alright. On to the Trifecta now. It's really not the end of the world that the Cowboys brought Erving in. There were just so many better options out there. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I just want it on the record that I don't like that move. I don't like him. He's just a terrible player. Okay. Now it's time to recap the Cincinnati Bengals draft class. I'm not going to talk about Joe Burrow again. We all know that was the correct pick, and I think Burrow's going to be a great Bengal for a long time. The only thing I'll say is, there may come a point 30 years from now when we're talking about how a guy like Tua Tagovailoa slipped past the Bengals when they needed a quarterback. Nothing against Burrow, but I think Tua has the higher ceiling. If Tua stays healthy, I think he'll be the better quarterback. It's a big if, though. He has a lot of injury concerns. Joe Burrow was the correct pick. It was an A-plus pick. I just think it's going to be an interesting subplot to track. Who has the better career, Burrow or Tua? But I gotta say this. The Bengals gave Burrow a great weapon to play with. This is similar to something that they did in 2011. They took A.J. Green, 4th overall, and then, in the second round, they gave him a pretty good quarterback to catch passes from in Andy Dalton. The Bengals did that. They just did that backwards. They took the great quarterback in Burrow, and they paired him with one hell of a receiver in T. Higgins. This guy was a first-round talent. I had him as the 30th best prospect in this draft. He fell because this draft was so stacked with wide receivers. Higgins had a great year at Clemson. 59 catches for over 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns. Jack of all trades, master of none. He doesn't have great separation skills. He doesn't have blazing speed. He ran just under a 4.640 at the combine. But he makes up for it with great ball skills. He has home run ability. Pairing Higgins with A.J. Green and Tyler Boyd will make that Bengals offense really scary. That's going to be a team that is going to surprise some people. I'm telling you. While the Bengals are not a playoff threat by any stretch, it wouldn't surprise me if they finished with 5 or 6 wins. And after you are coming off a 2-win season, if you triple that, that's pretty darn good. You're trending in the right direction there. I like what the Bengals have cooking. There were a lot of people that were higher on Logan Wilson than me. I had him as a mid-third rounder. ESPN had him as the 47th best prospect in this draft. The thing is, when you look at his production and his frame and all that good stuff, he jumps off the page. But when you look at things that a linebacker needs to do to be successful in the NFL, like tackling, pass rush, run stuffing, Wilson's good, but he's not great. He's got a lot of potential. He works hard. He was a team captain at Wyoming 3 times. I like that a lot. The talent is there. The Bengals just need to get it out of him. Akeem Davis-Gaither was a steal in the 4th round. This is a guy who I had an early to mid 3rd round grade on. Jack of all trades, master of none. The thing that you really don't like about him is he does have injury concerns. He didn't run at the combine because he needed surgery to repair a partial stress fracture in his right foot. And he's 6'1.5", 224 pounds. He is going to get bullied by the stronger offensive linemen in this league. But this kid is incredibly athletic. He is fast when you watch him play at Appalachian State. He blazed around the field. Great tackler. Great range against the run. You can play him all 3 downs. Davis Gaither's going to be a really good player in this league for a long time. He does need to add some muscle. I understand that. And coming back from surgery, that's going to be hard, but the talent is there. Just like with Logan Wilson, Lou Anarumo, Bengals defensive coordinator, is going to need to work to get it out of him. It's just that simple. Khalid Kareem was picked with the first pick in the 5th round. That fit his range. Another jack of all trades, master of none. Good against the run. Good instincts. He is athletic. Good frame. Not a great pass rusher. It can improve. I think Kareem can be a good player in this league. I don't know if he'll ever be a great player, but in the 5th round, you're not really looking for great. If you can get good, that's great. I hope that made sense. I don't like the fact that the Bengals waited until the 6th round to fill their second biggest need, which was the offensive line. Their biggest need was quarterback. Their second biggest need was O-line. And I'm not even a huge fan of the player that they got in Hakeem Adeniji. He doesn't have good footwork. He's not very athletic. I just think with a guy like Trey Adams sitting there, I don't know how he went undrafted, but the fact that a guy like Adams was there, you can just go down the line. Adams, Terrence Steele, Alex Taylor, etc., etc. The fact that they took Adeniji to fill their second biggest need, that confused me. I didn't like that. At the end of the day, you can put the best weapons in the world around Joe Burrow, but if he doesn't have time to throw the ball, he's gonna bust. There were better players available that the Bengals could have taken to fill their second biggest need. I didn't like the Adeniji pick. I did like the Marcus Bailey pick, though. In the 7th round, you can take a gamble on a guy who does have talent, but just can't stay healthy. And Bailey has probably the second biggest injury history in this draft, with the exception of Tua. I'd have to think about it, but I can't think of anyone who would come ahead of Bailey, besides Tua. He had a season-ending knee injury in 2019, hip surgery during the offseason. This guy is like an old Mickey Mantle. This guy's like Steve Ettman. Injury after injury after injury. But when you watch him play at Purdue, you can see the talent. Great tackler. 82 solo tackles in 2018. In the Big Ten, that's really impressive. And he does everything else pretty darn well. Certainly worth the gamble to take him in the 7th round. If he works out, you've got a really good player on your hands. If not, alright, you only wasted a 7th rounder. All in all, the Bengals had a really, really good draft. They filled their needs with the exception of offensive line. I'm going to ding them a little bit for that, but not too much. Same grade as the Jets, B+. Alright, it's time for this day in sports history. On this day, in 1994, the Denver Nuggets beat the Seattle Supersonics in Game 5 of the first round of the NBA playoffs to become the first 8 seed to beat a 1 seed in the playoffs. Just to give you a sense of how improbable that upset was, let me rewind the clock a little bit. The year before that, 92-93, was George Karl's first full year coaching the Supersonics. They went 55-27, narrowly lost to the Suns in the Western Conference Finals. They took the Suns to 7 games. But they were just no match for Charles Barkley. Barkley that year was a man on a mission, and only Jordan could stop him. But then Jordan retires. Someone has to fill that void in the NBA. The Supersonics came close to doing it. While they didn't have any big scoring threats, they had really, really, really great all-around players. Their leading scorer that year was Shawn Kemp. Kemp only averaged 18 points that year, but he averaged 11 rebounds, 2 steals, and 2 blocks. Gary Payton, second leading scorer, 16.5 points, 6 assists to go with 2.5 steals a game. There's a reason they called him the Glove. Detlef Schrempf was their third leading scorer, 15 points, 5.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists. Ricky Pierce coming off the bench. Kendall Gill in his first year with the Sonics. What a terrible decision by the Hornets to trade him. I mean, you gotta wonder what they were thinking about when they traded Kendall Gill. I always liked Kendall Gill. Remember him with the Nets vividly. Sam Perkins was there. Nate McMillan was a good backup point guard for him. Michael Cage was there. He was a good rebounder. That was a very well-rounded Supersonics team. And they finished 63-19. They were the best team in the NBA that year when you look at regular season record, and it really wasn't close. The second best team, when you look at regular season record, was the Rockets. They were 5 games behind the Sonics. And when you look at the Nuggets, they were the 8th seed, but they made it solidly. They were 42-40. Dan Issel was a good coach for him. They were a very good defensive team. They could match up with the Sonics defensively. But before that, the Nuggets had been through hell. They hired Paul Westhead. Westhead and Dikembe Mutombo clashed. Westhead was a terrible coach for him. Great college coach, terrible pro coach for the Nuggets anyway. Dan Issel took over for him, and within 2 years, got him in the playoffs. They had the artist formerly known as Chris Jackson, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, LaFonso Ellis, really nice guy, Reggie Williams, Bryant Stiff, and Mutombo. They had no bench, though. Robert Pack and Rodney Rogers were solid players, but nothing great. And after that, it really fell off. Bison Dele was a good rebounder, but that was pretty much it. Tom Hammonds didn't do much of anything. No one expected the Nuggets to do anything in that series. And through the first couple games, the series went the way that everyone thought it would. Game 1, Seattle blew out Denver by 24 points, 106-82. And then Game 2 was a little closer, but the Nuggets still lost by 10, 97-87. Game 3, back in Denver. Bear in mind, this is a best of 5 series. So Game 3, back in Denver, obviously, do-or-die situation. Reggie Williams explodes for 31 points. The Nuggets blow out the Sonics 110-93. Mutombo did his thing on the glass, got 13 rebounds. Dominant performance. Okay, no big deal, they're just prolonging the inevitable, right? Well, not really. The Nuggets battled through 4 quarters with the Sonics. Forced the game into overtime. They were down 5 heading into the 4th quarter. Forced the game into overtime. They outscored the Supersonics 12-3 in overtime. LaFonso Ellis goes off, 27 points, 17 rebounds. Again, Mutombo did his thing on the glass, 10 points, 16 rebounds, and 8 blocks. It sets up a do-or-die Game 5 back in Seattle. One of the most underrated games in NBA history. A back-and-forth affair. I don't think anyone was ever up by more than single digits. The Sonics played well all throughout this series. Peyton didn't no-show. Schrempf didn't no-show. Gill didn't no-show. Kemp didn't no-show. The Sonics did everything they could, but Bison Dele comes off the bench to play 34 minutes, has 17 points, and 19 rebounds. Even though their leading scorer, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, only played 21 minutes, Robert Pack played most of those point guard minutes. Pack stepped up, was the high man with 23 points. The Nuggets won in overtime, 98-94. One of the biggest upsets in NBA history. In fact, you can make the argument it was the biggest upset in NBA history at that point in time. When I say that no one was picking the Nuggets, there were very few people in Denver that were picking the Nuggets. And even after that, they were able to ride that momentum into Utah for a competitive 7-game series. The Jazz went up 3-0. The Nuggets come storming back. They force a do-or-die Game 7. The Jazz nearly become the first team in NBA history to blow a 3-0 lead. But they're able to win Game 7, 91-81, thanks to a Herculean effort by Karl Malone, putting up 31 points and 14 rebounds. And the fact that John Stockton was non-existent in that game just makes that performance that much better. But to put that upset into perspective, it'd be the equivalent of the Orlando Magic coming back from a 3-0 deficit against the Milwaukee Bucks. It was one of the biggest upsets of its time, one of the biggest upsets in NBA history, and it's a shame how it's been lost to history. If you can find some of those games, watch them. They are worth watching. Alright, it's time for another Mount Rushmore. We're on the Seattle Mariners now, and I am 5/6 of the way through a docuseries, a YouTube docuseries on the history of baseball in Seattle. It's the latest installment of Dorktown by SB Nation. I love SB Nation. Shout out to them. The Mariners have had a really interesting history. I'm not going to go through everything that's ever happened in their franchise's history, but they've never won a World Series. They've never even won a pennant. I mean, the best team they had, the 116-win team in 01, lost to the Yankees in 5 games in the 01 ALCS. I mean, even 95. The Mariners upset the Yankees in 5 games in the ALDS. Thank you, Jack McDowell. They can't get past the Indians. 2000, Good Mariners team, not a great one. They can't get past the Yankees. Lose to them in 6 games in the ALCS. But they have had some great, and I mean great players play for them. Griffey, Randy Johnson, A-Rod, Ichiro, Edgar Martinez, Jay Buhner, Felix Hernandez. Some of the best players of their era played for the Mariners at one point. And they couldn't even win a pennant. Unreal. The correct Mount Rushmore is Ken Griffey Jr., Ichiro Suzuki, Edgar Martinez, and Felix Hernandez. Griffey, obviously one of the best players of his era, killed the Yankees. I mean, that picture of him at the bottom of the pile, iconic picture. It's a shame that he was never a Yankee. And when he was a free agent, the Yankees did have some interest in signing him, but Griffey had no interest in playing for him. He saw how his father was mistreated by them. He didn't want to sign with them. I can't say I blame him. Ichiro Suzuki, probably the most dominant hitter of the 2000s. If he had played his whole career in Major League Baseball, he probably would have beaten Rose's all-time hits record. He probably would have gotten to 4,300 hits, probably even more, 4,500 hits. I mean, this guy did something in 2001 that's only been done by one other person, Fred Lynn. Win Rookie of the Year and MVP in the same year. And he deserved it, too. Led the American League with a .350 average, and led the majors with 242 hits and 56 steals. He was unreal. From 2001 to 2010, he never had less than 200 hits. And I remember when the Yankees traded for him, DJ Mitchell and David Phelps for Ichiro. I love that trade. You remember who broke that trade first? Jack Curry. I've met Jack Curry. Really nice guy. Edgar Martinez, one of the best DHs of all time. He's lucky that the DH is a thing because he was a terrible third baseman. I mean, without the DH, he probably doesn't make it. As great a hitter as he was, and he was a really, really good hitter, won 2 batting titles. His glove was such a liability. He shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, though. Only 2,200 hits, 300 home runs. That's Hall of Very Good. That's not Hall of Fame. Felix Hernandez was kind of tough to decide on for the 4th spot. I could have very easily put Buhner there, or Randy Johnson, or A-Rod. But Felix Hernandez at one point was probably the best pitcher in baseball. I mean, this guy really started the trend of winning the Cy Young Award without getting a lot of wins. Went 13-12 in 2010 with a 2.27 ERA and won the Cy Young. I vehemently disagreed with that at the time. I still disagree with it. I think CC Sabathia should have won it. The guy went 21-7 with a 3.18 ERA for a Yankees team that was defending a World Series and made it to the ALCS. What did the Mariners do that year? Nothing. King Felix wasn't even an all-star that year. That team was so bad that they fired their manager midway through the season, Don Wakamatsu. That team finished with 100 losses, and Felix still won Cy Young. Unreal. What's the matter? People don't look at meaningful games anymore for Cy Young? I just don't get it. Alright, I teased this interview at the end of yesterday's show, teased it on Twitter. Here it is now, my interview with Doug Feldmann.
You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I'm fortunate enough to be talking to an old friend of mine, a guy who I haven't spoken to in years, but he's a really smart guy. Love talking to him. I saw him on MLB Network doing a special about Whitey Ball. That was really fun. It's Doug Feldmann. His latest book is A View from Two Benches, Bob Thomas in Football and the Law. Doug, long time no chat. How are you today, pal? Okay?
Just fine, Jacob. How are you? Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, good to talk to you too. I'm doing fine. So, Thomas isn't exactly the most household of names. Why did you want to write a book about him?
Well, I grew up in Chicago in the 1970s. I grew up a Bears fan as a little kid, and he came to the Bears as a rookie in 1975 when I was 5 years old, when I first started kind of following the team. And here's a guy who reached the very top of two separate and distinct professions. I mean, a guy who became an NFL kicker for 10 years and was in the top, as of just a couple of years ago, was still in the top 100 career scorers in NFL history. He's tied with Jim Brown, as a matter of fact. I don't know the exact total, but he and Jim Brown were still in the top 100 as of a couple of years ago. So he kicked for 10, 11 years in the NFL. While he was with the Bears, he went to law school. And shortly after his NFL career, he practiced law for a few years, became a circuit court judge, became an appellate court judge, and then in 2000 was elected as a Supreme Court justice in Illinois and served there for 20 years and just retired a couple of months ago. In fact, in February of this year, he just announced he's not seeking another 10-year term. So, I mean, quite a story, a guy who reached, again, the top of two very separate and distinct professions, but there's more to it than that.
No, definitely. So he started his football career at Notre Dame. What can you tell us about Thomas's time with the Fighting Irish, specifically the 1973 Sugar Bowl?
Sure. He was all set to stay home in Rochester, New York, where he went to high school, where he grew up. University of Rochester, a very good academic school, wanted him to play soccer and kick for the football team. But his parents, he got a letter in the mail from Ara Parseghian, which is probably a form letter, but it was a recruiting letter saying you're being evaluated for the Irish for football. And that got him excited. And as his senior year went along, his parents saw that he really had this desire to go to Notre Dame. So his parents agreed to send him to South Bend as a walk-on player. He had to pay his own way. He wasn't recruited by Parseghian in the secondary round of recruiting, but was on the team as a freshman. And this was back when freshmen were ineligible to play. So the freshmen had their own team and their own games. But he was on the team, non-scholarship player. And then his sophomore year of the fall of 1971, he became the Irish starting kicker, was the starting kicker for 3 years. And then, yes, in the 1973 season, that epic game, some call it the game of the century, on New Year's Eve, 1973, Notre Dame plays Alabama, both really de facto number one. They're really tied for number one ranking in the polls. They meet in the Sugar Bowl on a rainy, stormy night in Tulane Stadium in New Orleans. And with 4 minutes to play in a game that went back and forth, Bob kicked a field goal that put the Irish ahead 24-23. And the defense was able to hang on, and they beat Bear Bryant for the national championship.
Hey, that's pretty good. I'll take that as the highlight of my college career.
Right.
So,
and in fact, there's a picture in the New Orleans paper the next day of Bob laying in his hotel bed with his shoes off, and he's like pointing at his right toe. And I guess that picture was like made famous like all over the country. He showed me a copy of it, but apparently that was sent out in several newspapers across the country. It's pretty funny.
I like that picture. That's a good picture. So, can you lay out Thomas's journey throughout the 1974 NFL draft?
Yes. In fact, it's an interesting point because due to injuries, due to being cut, due to other things, Bob misses 2 or almost 3 full seasons in the NFL, starting with what would have been his 1974 rookie season in the NFL. He was drafted late in the 74 draft by the Los Angeles Rams, And going into 74, the Rams had a returning kicker, a veteran named David Ray. But there was a contract dispute with the Players Association of the NFL. A lot of the players were holding out of training camp. So as it turned out, Bob, as a rookie, was the only kicker, or one of the only kickers in camp, and David Ray was not. So Bob used that to his advantage. He impressed the Rams coaches, but at the very end of preseason, he was told by Chuck Knox, the Rams coach, that, hey, we think we have a chance to go to the Super Bowl with this Rams team, and we need to stay with the veteran kicker. So even though you showed yourself well in the preseason, we're going to go with David Ray. So he missed out on he didn't sign with a couple other teams showed interest, but he didn't sign with anyone else and just sat out the fall of 74 and went back to Rochester and South Bend for a while to just working out and thinking of law school, but keeping the leg in shape, hoping that he'll get one more opportunity down the road.
Well, he got that opportunity in 1975, and we're talking to Doug Feldmann, the author of A View from Two Benches, Bob Thomas in Football and the Law. In 75, the Chicago Bears came calling. How did he first get to the Bears?
Well, he went through the waiver wire, and two teams at the end of the 74 season, two teams expressed an interest through the waiver wire in Thomas, the Washington Redskins and the Chicago Bears. Because the Bears had a worse record than the Redskins, they got first crack at Thomas, and they signed him. And going into 75, I mean, this is a complete overhaul of the Bears going into 1975. George Halas, the old owner, for 75, he hired a new head coach, a man named Jack Pardee, a new general manager, a man named Jim Finks. And by the opening week of the 1975 season, the Bears, 34 out of the Bears' 45 players on the roster were new. There were 17 rookies and 17 veteran free agents and waiver acquisitions that were brand new. So over 75%, that's just over 75% of the roster was new. So it was a fresh start for everyone. Bob told me when I talked to him, he said, the Bears kicker from 1974 was a Czechoslovakian bricklayer named Miro Roeder, and didn't have a great season. And Bob said, it wasn't like Jack Pardee had all these great memories of Miro Roeder kicking game-winning field goals. Everyone had a fresh start, and all jobs were there for taking. And he seized the Bears' kicking job as a rookie in 75, even though, as you say, it really should have been his second year in the league.
Right. So we'll fast forward a little bit to one of the highlights of his NFL career. Would you be able to describe the event of December 18th, 1977?
I sure can, because it was my greatest day as a young Bears fan. I was 7 years old, watching a game on TV taking place in New York just before Christmas, and it would have been just a great early Christmas present for me if the Bears could win, because it would put them in the playoffs for the first time in my life and the first time in 14 years, first time since 1963. And it's one of the more famous weather games in NFL history. We think of the Ice Bowl with the Packers and the Cowboys, but Paul Hornig, of course, the great Packers running back, was doing the color commentary for that game for CBS TV, and he said that the field at the Meadowlands that day was even worse than Lambeau Field that day at the Ice Bowl. I mean, covered with a sheet of sleet, and the players couldn't get any traction. Walter Payton was trying to get the single-season all-time rushing record. He had no chance because of the weather, but came down to the kickers, Joe Danello for the Giants and Thomas for the Bears, and both struggled. Two bad snaps prevented the Bears from winning the game earlier in overtime. But with 9 seconds left in overtime, Bob with the third chance, and he pokes a field goal through for a Bears win, and the Bears go to the playoffs again for the first time in 14 years.
Yeah, and it's important to note that was against the Giants, not the Jets. So that's a happy memory for me.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
I hate the Giants. I'm sure you hate the Packers. I hate the Giants. Would you agree with that?
Well, in all honesty, I'm a Bears. This is very unusual. I'm a Bears fan that doesn't hate the Packers. I appreciate all teams in all sports, baseball, football, all teams that have a solid history. And I'm not saying I like the Packers. I don't dislike them.
Wow. Okay. I actually own shares in the Packers, so you're talking to an NFL owner.
All right. That's very good.
So, well, fast forward a little bit more through Thomas's career. What was it like for him when he was cut by the Bears?
Well, actually, he was cut twice. Once was in the strike season of '82, where a kicker named John Rivetto was kept in place of Thomas after Thomas had a hamstring injury, which the Bears thought hadn't fully healed. He was picked up by the Detroit Lions. He kicked well for the Lions before the strike hit, but then was let go when Eddie Murray, the Lions' regular kicker, came back after a contract dispute. And then perhaps Thomas's more famous, he always says he got fired twice by Mike Ditka. The first time was '82. The second time was, more unfortunately, I would say 1985, because the Bears have this great team, and because they have a great team, they're able to afford a fourth-round draft pick on a kicker. And they take Kevin Butler of the University of Georgia, who was a Southeastern Conference all-time leading scorer at the time, was a much heralded college kicker. And Bob was stunned. I mean, he had just come off his greatest year as a kicker. He had over 100 points in 1984, his best year as a kicker. And then the Bears go out and draft a new kicker. So he was a little bit insulted, but he was ready for a battle in training camp. And they were dead even through the preseason. But in the end, it wound up being Butler being selected by Ditka and the coaching staff. And it was a real dilemma. The Bears, they were thinking, well, if we're a playoff team, we'd love to have a veteran kicker, in tough playoff games for the pressure like Thomas. But how often does a kicker of the quality of Kevin Butler come along? Do you pass on him? So they're really in a dilemma. They went with Butler, so Bob misses out on the Bears' great 1985 season in the Super Bowl run.
Talking to Doug Feldmann, the author of A View from Two Benches, Bob Thomas in Football and the Law. So you alluded to having a veteran kicker in the playoffs. Thomas did kick for the Bears in the playoffs. Unfortunately, 3 of those games were blowouts, but one wasn't. December 30th, 1984, Bears-Redskins, the divisional round. What can you tell us about the '84 NFL playoffs?
Well, the Bears got hot toward the end of that year. Their defense started playing really well. It's a kind of a prelude to what would happen in '85 with the defense. They come into Washington, RFK Stadium, and I don't know if it was an upset or not. I suppose it was. I don't know what the line on the game was, but I believe the score was 23-19. They win, and Bob's last field goal for the Bears was made in that game because they go up to San Francisco and, as you say, get blown out in the NFC Championship game. But again, all it did was leave the Bears and Thomas and Ditka and Walter Payton and all those guys hungrier for '85. And but of course, as I said, it doesn't work out for Thomas being on the team in '85.
Yeah, but he did get a Super Bowl ring in '86 for the Giants. Wait, did he get a ring? Because he only kicked in one game for him. I'm actually curious about this.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah. Then that's a great irony, you might say, is that he gets gypped out of a ring in '86 as well because he gets released by the Bears. He kicks in 1985. He actually signs with the San Diego Chargers, kicks the whole year for them. Chargers bring back Rolf Benerschke for '86, their regular kicker who was hurt. Bob tries with the Packers, doesn't work out, and then Bill Parcells signs him to the Giants, and he's all set to go to be the Giants kicker in '86. The opening game for the Giants in '86 is on Monday night in Dallas. It's Herschel Walker's NFL debut after playing in the USFL for the New Jersey Generals, of course. And Bob, the 2 days before they leave for Dallas, their last full practice, Bob steps in a hole on the practice field and tears ligaments in his ankle. So he's hobbling. He tries to kind of conceal the injury so that Parcells doesn't really know, but it's obvious because he's limping. He's in terrible pain on the plane as the team flies to Dallas. And if you can catch the video of that game, it's rare, but if you can catch video of it, you can see just by the way he's stepping on his kickoffs, by the way he's stepping on the field goal that he misses, Thomas is in real pain. And he's told by the team doctors, hey, this isn't going to heal anytime soon. You need to really probably take the rest of the season off. So as it happens, unfortunately for Bob, the then it's the year that the Giants march on to the Super Bowl, and for the second year in a row, he's denied a Super Bowl ring.
The ultimate irony about that is Thomas actually kicked sort of okay in that game, was 4 for 4 in extra points. I know he missed a field goal, which would have ended up tying the game. I don't know when that field goal was attempted. I don't know if it was early in the game, late in the game. Do you know?
I do not. He just he speaks of pain he had never felt before when he planted his left foot and kicked that ball. I believe it drifted right.
Okay.
He said he just never felt such pain. But we're correct. He was successful on his extra point attempts. That's right.
So my father's an attorney here in New York. If he found out that I interviewed someone about a football player who later became a judge but didn't ask anything about his law career, he'd probably kill me. So I'll ask a few of those questions now. Why did Thomas decide to pursue his JD?
Well, he has an older brother, Rick Thomas, 2 years older than Bob, who also went to law school where Bob went, Loyola University of Chicago. And I think that's what first whetted Bob's interest in the law, the fact that his older brother had gone. And his older brother developed a relationship with Professor Murdoch at Loyola. This Professor Murdoch got a hold of Bob saying, hey, I think here you might be interested in law school yourself. And Jim Finks, again, the general manager of the Bears, said, yeah, if you were any other position than a kicker, probably wouldn't work out, but since you guys have so much free time on your hands, yeah, I think it's a good idea you go to law school in the off season. So he did. It was 1977, and Bob started attending classes, went a kind of a part-time schedule, and more classes in the summer, obviously, but got his JD, passed the bar in 1981, and practiced law in the off season all those years. Those 5 years anyway, he was still kicking in the NFL.
That's pretty cool that he was able to do both. I can only imagine my father studying at law school and kicking for the Jets or Giants. I don't know how that would go.
Well, it's funny you mention that. Funny you mention that, Jacob, because when Bob was preparing for the bar exam, he noticed all his classmates, attending these study groups, and they were really stressed about passing the bar. And Bob said, I didn't have any time to be stressed. I was worried about keeping my job with the Bears. So I took notes, and I studied practice questions that were given to me for the bar exam, but I didn't have time. He said the fact that he didn't have time to study all the time resulted in him being very relaxed when the bar exam came, because he looked around the room at the bar exam and said all the other candidates they could barely move. They were so stressed, but he was relaxed because he had other things on his mind, like keeping his NFL job. So.
Well, it's funny. My father once told a story about the last sleepless night he had. It was the night before he took the New York State bar exam, and obviously he passed it, and he's had a successful law career as far as I know. I mean, he keeps a roof over our heads and is a good provider. I give my dad a hard time, but I do love him. He's a big influence in my life. I don't tell him that enough. So, Dad, if you listen to this, I do love you. Thank you. So can you lay out Thomas's defamation of character lawsuit?
Yes. This was in 2003, roughly that time period, where someone alerts him to an article in a suburban Chicago newspaper. A writer there, a man named Bill Page, had accused Thomas basically of official misconduct, tantamount to like a felony, in that Thomas was accused of trading his vote on a disciplinary matter of an attorney for support of a candidate he was supporting in a judicial election. In short, I mean, it was proved false. He had to wait about 2.5 years for the case to go to trial finally, but he won a civil lawsuit against the writer, against the newspaper, against the publisher. Just turned out to be just drawn from, fabricated from pure cloth. It was just straight poor journalism, and he was vindicated.
Good. I mean, hey, look, fake news is a real thing. I know that the president throws that term around willy-nilly. But look, it is a real thing, and an accusation like that can destroy a judge's career. I mean, that's terrible that a journalist would do that. I'm sure you'd agree with that, right?
Sure, and when he was put on the stand, Bob was asked by his own attorney, he said, what did your parents teach you about character? And Bob answered him, character is everything, that your word is your bond, and without your word, you have nothing, and I'm here to get my good name back.
Good for him.
And the thing is, he said, he said, with a defamation lawsuit, the plaintiff has to prove actual malice has taken place. In other words, Bob had to prove that he was he could have been denied a federal judgeship, a place in a prominent law firm, or it could have been disbarred because of these accusations. He had to prove that was actually the case. The plaintiff has to prove actual malice. And Bob said he knew that if the newspaper and the writer were let off on this case, if they were found not guilty, it wouldn't have been that Bob didn't prove actual malice. It would have been that Bob actually did these falsehoods that this writer was accusing him of. So he was very nervous about it. He was confident in his being innocent, but he was afraid that he knew he had been a judge for a long time already when that had happened. He'd been a judge for almost 10 years, and he knew that anything could happen when stuff goes to the jury. But they found in his favor in the civil suit, and the newspaper was required to apologize, print a retraction, but he was vindicated, and rightfully so. Good.
I mean, that's something that I'm really passionate about, people who are falsely accused of things. I mean, I've been falsely accused of things. I'm sure you've been falsely accused of things. I know,
we all have, sure.
I know a million people that have been falsely accused of things, and the first reaction that you have is to find the guy who's accusing you and beat the crap out of him. It's really it's true. Well, at least that's my first reaction. I give Thomas a ton of credit for having the character to stand up for himself and do this the right way, and it makes my heart happy to find out that the judicial system ruled in his favor. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and what you said, Jacob, is exactly what basically what Bob said on the stand also. He said, if a neighbor was accusing you of something you didn't do, wouldn't your first act be to go down to that neighbor and have a talk with him and say, what's the deal here? And
no question.
Thomas and his attorney contacted the newspaper twice, was requested twice by Thomas's attorney and the press secretary of the Illinois Supreme Court to issue a retraction. The newspaper just dug in its heels and said, "No, we're standing by the story," even though it was completely fabricated. So
right.
Anyway, in the end, he was exonerated, or they found in his favor for the civil lawsuit, and so yes, as you say, justice triumphs. Fortunately.
One more thing, and I know we're going on a tangent here, but did you ever see the movie Richard Jewell? It just came out last year.
I have not. I've heard good things. Very good things about it.
It's really good. I'm sure you know the story. Richard Jewell helps save a bunch of people at Olympic Park in Atlanta. He's thought of as the prime suspect by the FBI. It gets leaked, and his life is turned upside down. Meanwhile, the guy did nothing wrong, and it was great to see Eastwood put that out in the forefront. It wasn't a popular opinion. The movie got killed by the critics. I really liked it. I'll tell you right now, great cast, great story. I'm a big Olivia Wilde fan, so and Sam Rockwell.
Clint Eastwood can do no wrong as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Oh, please, I love Eastwood. Eastwood, Wilde, Rockwell, Paul Walter Hauser was good. Really, really good movie. I highly recommend it, and it plays into that story a lot. Talking to Doug Feldmann, the author of A View from Two Benches, Bob Thomas and Football and the Law. And, Doug, I know there are a million things that you'd rather listen to than to hear my movie opinions, so I'll catch you out on this. Would you be able to describe a typical day for you when you were writing this book?
Oh, when you're writing, there is no typical day, especially when you've got a 6-year-old climbing on you. Typical day, and the most typical day, I would say, having the pleasure to interview 1, 2, 3 prominent people from Bob's football career, from his legal career. I was very blessed to talk to all 6 other sitting Supreme Court justices who spoke about Bob, several of his NFL teammates, and just to walk through Bob's life through the eyes of these other individuals who know him so well and who work so closely with him. That was a real pleasure. And but I'm of the writing style where I just it works for me, I guess, to do it this way. If something's complete gibberish, I still just get it down. I go back and reorganize it later, and then I'm just fortunate that in my scrambled brain and at the end it all makes sense. So, but really, just the personal, the primary sources of speaking to people. I truly enjoy that aspect of not just this book, but other books I've done as well. It's really been a pleasure for me to dig up skeletons from my past. What I mean is, the old Blackhawks players, the old Bears players, Cubs players of my childhood. It's just a treat for me to do that. That doesn't feel like work when it's this kind of research. So.
And Doug, when you write your next book, you bet your you-know-what that I'm going to request an interview. How does that sound?
Well, thank you, Jacob. I'm always available to you. I appreciate all you do.
All right. That was Doug Feldmann. His book is A View from Two Benches, Bob Thomas in Football and the Law. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro.
Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. Tomorrow, I'm going to react to the NFL schedule. I don't know what I'm going to exactly be reacting to, but I'll come up with something. You'll probably get another edition of the Trifecta. It's hard to believe it, man. May 7th. And there's nothing to talk about when it comes to live sports. That's unreal. We should be talking about baseball, hockey, and basketball. This hiatus can't end soon enough. But until then, we have to stay safe. We have to stay vigilant. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying that the only thing worse than a Mets game is a Mets doubleheader.